Have you ever noticed how your chest tightens the moment you realize you might actually need help? Like your brain immediately starts drafting a resignation letter from your own independence. It's that split second where you consider asking someone for support, advice, a favor, anything, and then your nervous system goes, absolutely not. We will simply suffer quietly and figure this out alone at 2 a.m. And if you've lived that moment, you've probably been told some version of the same thing your whole life, that you're stubborn, too proud, bad at teamwork, emotionally closed off. Why don't you just ask, people say, as if the idea hasn't already occurred to you and been violently rejected by every cell in your body. But here's the part society tends to miss. Psychology doesn't see this pattern as a moral flaw or a character defect. It sees it as a form of wiring, a strategy, sometimes even an intelligence. Because people who hate asking for help aren't lazy or antisocial. They're usually protecting something very specific, very old, and very rational, even if it no longer feels optional. This brings us to a concept psychologists call self-reliance as identity, which sounds empowering until you realize it's not just something you value, it's something your nervous system enforces. For some people, independence isn't a preference, it's like oxygen. The moment it feels threatened, your body reacts as if you're being slowly suffocated. Often, this develops early in environments where help was inconsistent, conditional, or came with strings attached. When support only arrived after guilt, disappointment, or emotional debt, your brain learned a simple rule: needing less keeps you safer. Over time, self-reliance stopped being a skill and became a core identity. Imagine your sense of self like a load-bearing wall. Asking for help feels like removing a brick, not because the building would actually collapse, but because your brain was trained to believe it might. So when someone says, just let people help you, it doesn't land as kindness, it lands as risk. And then there's something deeper operating beneath the surface, something called avoidant attachment. This isn't about not liking people, it's about how your nervous system learned to regulate closeness. If connection once meant unpredictability, intrusion, or emotional overwhelm, your system adapted by becoming fiercely self-sufficient. For avoidantly wired people, asking for help triggers the same internal alarm as standing too close to the edge of a cliff. Your brain starts scanning for loss of control, obligation, or vulnerability hangovers. You might intellectually understand that help doesn't equal danger anymore, but attachment patterns don't update through logic, they update through felt safety. This is why you might be perfectly capable of giving help, advice, emotional labor, even overextending yourself for others, while simultaneously refusing to ask for anything in return. Giving maintains control, asking hands it away, and your nervous system has a long memory. But it doesn't stop there. There's also a surprisingly biological layer to all of this. People who resist asking for help often have heightened sensitivity to autonomy threats, something linked to psychological reactance. Reactance is what happens when your brain perceives its freedom being limited and immediately pushes back. Think of your autonomy like a thermostat. For some people, it's set unusually high. Any hint of dependence, expectation, or perceived obligation spikes discomfort. Help doesn't feel neutral, it feels like a future invoice. Even if no one is asking for repayment, your brain preloads the cost. This is why well-meaning offers can feel oddly irritating. Not because you don't appreciate them, but because your system hears, now you owe something, and owing anything emotionally feels unsafe. Then there's something deeper operating beneath the surface, something called quiet perfectionism woven through all of this. Not the flashy, color-coded planner kind, but the internalized belief that competence equals worth. When you hate asking for help, it's often because you learned that being capable made you easier to love, less burdensome, more acceptable. So you became hyper-competent. You learned to anticipate needs before they were spoken. You minimized your own. Over time, asking for help started to feel like violating an unspoken contract. Don't be too much. Don't need too loudly. Don't disrupt the system. And here's the part no one says out loud. For many people, refusing help is not about pride, it's about dignity. It's about preserving a sense of self that feels intact. Asking threatens that image, not because it's weak, but because it reminds you of a time when needing came at a cost. What's fascinating is that research consistently shows that people who struggle to ask for help are often highly empathetic, emotionally intelligent, and deeply conscientious. You don't want to inconvenience others because you're acutely aware of their load. You don't want to burden because you've spent years absorbing other people's burdens without complaint. So you tell yourself you're fine, you'll handle it, you always do. Until the isolation creeps in, until burnout shows up wearing a productivity mask, until independence quietly turns into loneliness you're not sure how to name. And still, the solution isn't forcing yourself to ask for help like it's exposure therapy you didn't consent to, because your resistance isn't random, it's protective. It kept you functional when support wasn't reliable. It helped you survive systems that rewarded self-erasure disguised as strength. The goal isn't to shame that part of you into submission, it's to renegotiate with it. To recognize that asking for help doesn't erase your competence, it expands it. That autonomy isn't lost when support is chosen rather than forced. Think of help not as surrender but as collaboration, not as dependency but as leverage. Even the most advanced machines rely on networks. Even the strongest structures distribute load. You aren't broken for hating the idea of asking for help. You're patterned. You're adapted. You're responding exactly as a nervous system would after learning that safety lived in self-sufficiency. The real work isn't learning how to ask louder, it's learning to feel safe enough to need at all. And that's not a personality flaw, that's a healing process. So, how does this land for you? Does it feel like relief, discomfort, recognition, or all three at once? And if you found yourself nodding along, don't worry, I'm not going to beg you to like or subscribe. You'll only do it if it feels internally justified, logically sound, and emotionally low risk, which, honestly, tracks perfectly.